Ceremonial magic and sorcery. Ceremonial magic is the ancient art of invoking and controlling spirits by a scientific application of certain formulae. A magician, enveloped in sanctified vestments and carrying a wand inscribed with hieroglyphic figures, could, by the power vested in certain words and symbols, control the invisible inhabitants of the elements and of the astral world. While the elaborate ceremonial magic of antiquity was not necessarily evil, there arose from its perversion several false schools of sorcery, or black magic. Egypt, a great center of learning and the birthplace of many arts and sciences, furnished an ideal environment for transcendental experimentation. Here, the black magicians of Atlantis continued to exercise their superhuman powers until they had completely undermined and corrupted the morals of the primitive mysteries. By establishing a sacerdotal caste, they usurped the position formerly occupied by the initiates and seized the reins of spiritual government. Thus, black magic dictated the state religion and paralyzed the intellectual and spiritual activities of the individual by demanding his complete and unhesitating acquiescence in the dogma formulated by the priestcraft. The pharaoh became a puppet in the hands of the Scarlet Council, a committee of arch-sorcerers elevated to power by the priesthood. These sorcerers then began the systematic destruction of all keys to the ancient wisdom, so that none might have access to the knowledge necessary to reach adeptship without first becoming one of their order. They mutilated the rituals of the mysteries while professing to preserve them, so that even though the neophyte passed through the degrees, he could not secure the knowledge to which he was entitled. Idolatry was introduced by encouraging the worship of the images, which in the beginning the wise had erected solely as symbols for study and meditation. False interpretations were given to the emblems and figures of the mysteries, and elaborate theologies were created to confuse the minds of their devotees. The masses, deprived of then birthright of understanding and groveling in ignorance, eventually became the abject slaves of the spiritual impostors. Superstition universally prevailed, and the black magicians completely dominated national affairs, with the result that humanity still suffers from the sophistries of the priestcrafts of Atlantis and Egypt. Fully convinced that their scriptures sanctioned it, numerous medieval Kabbalists devoted their lives to the practice of ceremonial magic. The transcendentalism of the Kabbalists is founded upon the ancient and magical formula of King Solomon, who has long been considered by the Jews as the prince of ceremonial magicians. Among the Kabbalists of the Middle Ages were a great number of black magicians who strayed from the noble concepts of the Sefer Yetzirah and became enmeshed in demonism and witchcraft. They sought to substitute magic mirrors, consecrated daggers, and circles spread around posts of coffin nails for the living of that virtuous life which, without the assistance of complicated rituals or submundane creatures, unfailingly brings man to the state of true individual completion. Those who sought to control elemental spirits through ceremonial magic did so largely with the hope of securing from the invisible worlds either rare knowledge or supernatural power. The little red demon of Napoleon Bonaparte and the infamous oracular heads of de Medici are examples of the disastrous results of permitting elemental beings to dictate the course of human procedure. While the learned and godlike daemon of Socrates seems to have been an exception, this really proves that the intellectual and moral status of the magician has much to do with the type of elemental he is capable of invoking. But even the daemon of Socrates deserted the philosopher when the sentence of death was passed. Transcendentalism and all forms of phenomenalistic magic are but blind alleys, outgrowths of Atlantean sorcery, and those who forsake the straight path of philosophy to wander therein almost invariably fall victims to their imprudence. Man, incapable of controlling his own appetites, is not equal to the task of governing the fiery and tempestuous elemental spirits. Many a magician has lost his life as the result of opening a way whereby submundane creatures could become active participants in his affairs. When Eliphas Levi invoked the spirit of Apollonius of Tyana, what did he hope to accomplish? Is the gratification of curiosity a motive sufficient to warrant the devotion of an entire lifetime to a dangerous and unprofitable pursuit? If the living Apollonius refused to divulge his secrets to the profane, Is there any probability that after death he would disclose them to the curious-minded? Levi himself did not dare to assert that the specter which appeared to him was actually the great philosopher, for Levi realized only too well the proclivity of elementals to impersonate those who have passed on. The majority of modem mediumistic apparitions are but elemental creatures masquerading through bodies composed of thought substance, supplied by the very persons desiring to behold these wraiths of decimate beings. The theory and practice of black magic. Some understanding of the intricate theory and practice of ceremonial magic may be derived from a brief consideration of its underlying premises. First, the visible universe has an invisible counterpart, the higher planes of which are peopled by good and beautiful spirits. The lower planes, dark and foreboding, are the habitation of evil spirits and demons under the leadership of the fallen angel and his 10 princes. Second, by means of the secret processes of ceremonial magic, it is possible to contact these invisible creatures and gain their help in some human undertaking. Good spirits willingly lend their assistance to any worthy enterprise, but the evil spirits serve only those who live to pervert and destroy. Third, it is possible to make contracts with spirits whereby the magician becomes for a stipulated time the master of an elemental being. Fourth, true black magic is performed with the aid of a demoniacal spirit who serves the sorcerer for the length of his earthly life, with the understanding that after death the magician shall become the servant of his own demon. For this reason, a black magician will go to inconceivable ends to prolong his physical life, since there is nothing for him beyond the grave. The most dangerous form of black magic is the scientific perversion of occult power for the gratification of personal desire. Its less complex and more universal form is human selfishness, for selfishness is the fundamental cause of all worldly evil. A man will barter his eternal soul for temporal power, and down through the ages, a mysterious process has been evolved which actually enables him to make this exchange. In its various branches, the black art includes nearly all forms of ceremonial magic, necromancy, witchcraft, sorcery, and vampirism. Under the same general heading are also included mesmerism and hypnotism, except when used solely for medical purposes, and even then there is an element of risk for all concerned. Though the demonism of the Middle Ages seems to have disappeared, there is abundant evidence that in many forms of modern thought, especially the so-called prosperity psychology, willpower building, metaphysics, and systems of high-pressure salesmanship, black magic has merely passed through a metamorphosis, and although its name be changed, its nature remains the same. Baphomet, the goat of Mendes. From Levi's Transcendental Magic. The practice of magic, either white or black, depends upon the ability of the adept to control the universal life force, that which Eliphas Levi calls the great magical agent or the astral light. By the manipulation of this fluidic essence, the phenomena of transcendentalism are produced. The famous hermaphroditic goat of Mendes was a composite creature formulated to symbolize this astral light. It is identical with Baphomet, the mystic pantheos of those disciples of ceremonial magic, the Templars, who probably obtained it from the Arabians. A well-known magician of the Middle Ages was Dr. Johannes Faustus, more commonly known as Dr. Faust. By a study of magical writings, he was enabled to bind to his service an elemental who served him for many years in various capacities. Strange legends are told concerning the magical powers possessed by Dr. Faust. Upon one occasion, the philosopher, being apparently in a playful mood, threw his mantle over a number of eggs in a market woman's basket, causing them to hatch instantly. At another time, having fallen overboard from a small boat, he was picked up and returned to the craft with his clothes still dry. But, like nearly all other magicians, Dr. Faust came at length to disaster. He was found one morning with a knife in his back, and it was commonly believed that his familiar spirit had murdered him. Although Goethe's Dr. Faust is generally regarded as merely a fictional character, this old magician actually lived during the 16th century. Dr. Faust wrote a book describing his experiences with spirits, a section of which is reprinted below. Dr. Faust must not be confused with Johann Fust, the printer. Extract from the Book of Dr. Faust, Wittenberg, 1524, an abridged translation from the original German of a book ordered destroyed. From my youth, I followed art and science and was tireless in my reading of books. Among those which came to my hand was a volume containing all kinds of invocations and magical formulas. In this book, I discovered information to the effect that a spirit, whether he be of the fire, the water, the earth, or the air, can be compelled to do the will of a magician capable of controlling him. I also discovered that according as one spirit has more power than another, each is adapted for a different operation, and each is capable of producing certain supernatural effects. After reading this wonderful book, I made several experiments, desiring to test the accuracy of the statements made therein. At first, I had little faith that what was promised would take place, but at the very first invocation which I attempted, a mighty spirit manifested to me, desiring to know why I had invoked him. His coming so amazed me that I scarcely knew what to say, but finally asked him if he would serve me in my magical investigations. He replied that if certain conditions were agreed upon, he would. The conditions were that I should make a pact with him. This I did not desire to do, but as in my ignorance I had not protected myself with a circle and was actually at the mercy of the spirit, I did not dare to refuse his request and resigned myself to the inevitable, considering it wisest to turn my mantle according to the wind. I then told him that if he would be serviceable to me according to my desires and needs for a certain length of time, I would sign myself over to him. After the pact had been arranged, this mighty spirit, whose name was Astaroth, introduced me to another spirit by the name of Marbwell, who was appointed to be my servant. I questioned Marbwell as to his suitability for my needs. I asked him how quick he was, and he answered, as swift as the winds. This did not satisfy me, so I replied, "You cannot become my servant. Go again whence you have come." Soon another spirit manifested itself, whose name was Onegel. Upon asking him the same question, he answered that he was swift as a bird in the air. I said, "You are still too slow for me. Go whence you came." In the same moment, another spirit by the name of Aciel manifested himself. For the third time I asked my question, and he answered, "I am as swift as human thought." "You shall serve me," I replied. This spirit was faithful for a long time, but to tell you how he served me is not possible in a document of this length, and I will here only indicate how spirits are to be invoked and how the circles for protection are to be prepared. There are many kinds of spirits which will permit themselves to be invoked by man and become his servant. Of these, I will list a few. Aciel, the mightiest among those who serve men. He manifests in pleasing human form, about 3 feet high. He must be invoked 3 times before he will come forth into the circle prepared for him. He will furnish riches and will instantly fetch things from a great distance, according to the will of the magician. He is as swift as human thought. Onegel, serviceable and most useful, and comes in the form of a 10-year-old boy. He must be invoked 3 times. His special power is to discover treasures and minerals hidden in the ground, which he will furnish to the magician. Marbwell, a true lord of the mountains and swift as a bird on the wing. He is an opposing and troublesome spirit, hard to control. You must invoke him 4 times. He appears in the person of Mars, a warrior in heavy armor. He will furnish the magician those things which grow above and under the earth. He is particularly the lord of the spring root. The spring root is a mysterious herb, possibly of a reddish color, which medieval magicians asserted had the property of drawing forth or opening anything it touched. If placed against a locked door, it would open the door. The Hermetists believed that the red-capped woodpecker was specially endowed with the faculty of discovering spring root, so they followed this bird to its nest and then stopped up the hole in the tree where its young were. The red-crested woodpecker went at once in quest of the spring root, and discovering it, brought it to the tree. It immediately drew forth the stopper from the entrance to the nest. The magician then secured the root from the bird. It was also asserted that because of its structure, the etheric body of the spring root was utilized as a vehicle of expression by certain elemental spirits which manifested through the proclivity of drawing out or opening things. Acibel, a mighty ruler of the sea, controlling things both upon and under the water. He furnishes things lost or sunk in rivers, lakes, and oceans, such as sunken ships and treasures. The more sharply you invoke him, the swifter he is upon his errands. Makil comes in the form of a beautiful maiden, and by her aid the magician is raised to honor and dignity. She makes those she serves worthy and noble, gracious and kindly, and assists in all matters of litigation and justice. She will not come unless invoked twice. Burwell, the master of all arts. He manifests as a master workman and comes wearing an apron. He can teach a magician more in a moment than all the master. Workmen of the world combined could accomplish in 20 years. He must be invoked 3 times. These are the spirits most serviceable to man, but there are numerous others which, for lack of space, I am unable to describe. Now, if you desire the aid of the spirit to get this or that, then you must first draw the sign of the spirit whom you desire to invoke. The drawing must be made just in front of a circle made before sunrise, in which you and your assistants will stand. If you desire financial assistance, then you must invoke the spirit Asiel. Draw his sign in front of the circle. If you need other things, then draw the sign of the spirit capable of furnishing them. On the place where you intend to make the circle, you must first draw a great cross with a large sword with which no one ever has been hurt. Then you must make 3 concentric circles. The innermost circle is made of a long, narrow strip of virgin parchment and must be hung upon 12 crosses made of the wood of crossthorn. Upon the parchment, you must write the names and symbols according to the figure which follows. Outside this first circle, make the second as follows. First, secure a thread of red silk that has been spun or twisted to the left instead of the right. Then place in the ground 12 crosses made of laurel leaves, and also prepare a long strip of new white paper. Write with an unused pen the characters and symbols as seen on the second circle. Wind this latter strip of paper around with the red silken thread and pin them upon the 12 crosses of laurel leaves. Outside this second circle, make a third one, which is also of virgin parchment, and pinned upon 12 crosses of consecrated palm. When you have made these 3 circles, retire into them until at last you stand in the center upon a pentagram drawn in the midst of the great cross first drawn. Now, to ensure success, do everything according to the description, and when you have read off the sacred invocation, pronounce the name of the spirit which you desire to appear. It is essential that you pronounce the name very distinctly. You must also note the day and the hour, for each spirit can only be invoked at certain times. A magical sword. From Levi's The Magical Ritual. Eliphas Levi describes the preparation of a magical sword in substance as follows. The steel blade should be forged in the hour of Mars with new tools. The pommel should be of hollow silver containing quicksilver, and the symbols of Mercury and the moon and the signatures of Gabriel and Samael should be engraved upon it. The hilt should be encased with tin with the symbol of Jupiter and the signature of Michael engraved upon it. A copper triangle should extend from the hilt along the blade a short distance on each side. These should bear the symbols of Mercury and Venus. 5 Sephiroth should be engraved upon the handle, as shown. The blade itself should have the word Malchut upon one side and Quisut Deus upon the other. The sword should be consecrated on Sunday. A magic circle. From the Complete Book of Magic Science, unpublished. The above figure is a complete and faithful representation of a magic circle as designed by medieval conjurers for the invocation of spirits. The magician, accompanied by his assistant, takes his place at the point formed by the crossing of the central lines marked Magister. The words about the circle are the names of the invisible intelligences, and the small crosses mark points at which certain prayers and invocations are recited. The small circle outside is prepared for the spirit to be invoked, and while in use, has the signature of the desired intelligence traced within the triangle. While the black magician at the time of signing his pact with the elemental demon may be fully convinced that he is strong enough to control indefinitely the powers placed at his disposal, he is speedily undeceived. Before many years elapse, he must turn all his energies to the problem of self-preservation. A world of horrors to which he has attuned himself by his own covetousness looms nearer every day, until he exists upon the edge of a seething maelstrom, expecting momentarily to be sucked down into its turbid depths. Afraid to die, because he will become the servant of his own demon, the magician commits crime after crime to prolong his wretched earthly existence. Realizing that life is maintained by the aid of a mysterious universal life force, which is the common property of all creatures, the black magician often becomes an occult vampire, stealing this energy from others. According to medieval superstition, black magicians turned themselves into werewolves and roamed the earth at night, attacking defenseless victims for the life force contained in their blood. Modus operandi for the invocation of spirits. The following condensed extract from an ancient manuscript is reproduced herewith as representative of the ritualism of ceremonial magic. The extract is from the Complete Book of Magic Science, an unpublished manuscript original in the British Museum, with pentacles in colors, mentioned by Francis Barrett in his Magus. Opening prayer. Omnipotent and eternal God, who hath ordained the whole creation for thy praise and glory, and for the salvation of man, I earnestly beseech thee that thou wouldst send one of thy spirits of the order of Jupiter, one of the messengers of Zadkiel, whom thou hast appointed governor of thy firmament at the present time, most faithfully, willingly, and readily, to show me these things which I shall ask, command, or require of him, and truly execute my desires. Nevertheless, O most holy God, thy will and not mine be done through J.C., thine only begotten Son, our Lord. Amen. The invocation. The magician, having properly consecrated his vestments and utensils, and being protected by his circle, now calls upon the spirits to appear and accede to his demands. Spirits, whose assistance I require, behold the sign and the very hallowed names of God full of power. Obey the power of this our pentacle. Go out your hidden caves and dark places. Cease your hurtful occupations to those unhappy mortals whom without ceasing you torment. Come into this place where the divine goodness has assembled us. Be attentive to our orders and known to our just demands. Believe not that your resistance will cause us to abandon our operations. Nothing can dispense with your obeying us. We command you by the mysterious names Elohe, Agla, Elohim, Adonai, Gibort. Amen. I call upon thee, Zadkiel, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, blessed Trinity, unspeakable unity. I invoke and entreat thee, Zadkiel, in this hour to attend to the words and conjurations which I shall use this day by the holy names of God, Elohe El Elohim, Elion Zebaoth, Eserehia Aya Adonai Tetragrammaton. I conjure thee, I exorcise thee, thou spirit Zadkiel, by these holy names Hagios O Theos, Iskiros, Athanatos Paracletus, Agla on Alpha et Omega Loth, Aglanbroth, Abiel Anathiel Tetragrammaton. And by all other great and glorious, holy and unspeakable, mysterious, mighty, powerful, incomprehensible names of God, that you attend unto the words of my mouth, and send unto me Pabiel, or other of your ministering, serving spirits, who may show me such things as I shall demand of him in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. I entreat thee, Pabiel, by the whole spirit of heaven, seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominations, witnesses, powers, principalities, archangels, and angels, by the holy, great, and glorious angels, Orphaniel Tetradagiel Salamla Asamoy, Pastor Poti, that thou come forthwith, readily show thyself, that we may see you and audibly hear you. Speak unto us and fulfill our desires, and by your star, which is Jupiter, and by all the constellations of heaven, and by whatsoever you obey, and by your character which you have given, proposed, and confirmed, that you attend unto me according to the prayer and petitions which I have made unto Almighty God, and that you forthwith send me one of your ministering spirits, who may willingly, truly, and faithfully fulfill all my desires, and that you command him to appear unto me in the form of a beautiful angel, gently, courteously, affably, and meekly, entering into communication with me, and that he neither permitting any evil spirit to approach in any sort of hurt, terrify, or affright me in any way, nor deceiving me in any wise. Through the virtue of our Lord J.C., in whose name I attend, wait for, and expect thy appearance. Fiat, fiat, fiat. Amen, amen, amen. Interrogatories. Having summoned the spirit unto his presence, the magician shall question him as follows. Comest thou in peace in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost? And the spirit shall answer, Yes. Thou art welcome, noble spirit. What is thy name? And the spirit shall answer, Pabiel. I have called thee in the name of Jesus of Nazareth, at whose name every knee doth bow in heaven, earth, and hell, and every tongue shall confess There is no name like unto the name of Jesus, who hath given power unto man to bind and to loose all things in his most holy name, yea, even unto those that trust in his salvation. Art thou the messenger of Zadkiel? And the Spirit shall answer, Yes. Wilt thou confirm thyself unto me at this time, and henceforth reveal all things unto me that I shall desire to know, and teach me how I may increase in wisdom and knowledge, and show unto me all the secrets of the magic art and of all liberal sciences, that I may thereby set forth the glory of Almighty God? And the Spirit shall answer, Yes. Then I pray thee, give and confirm thy character unto me, whereby I may call thee at all times, and also swear unto me this oath, and I will religiously keep my vow and covenant unto Almighty God, and will courteously receive thee at all times where thou dost appear unto me. License to depart. Forasmuch as thou comest in peace and quietness, and hath answered unto my petitions, I give humble and hearty thanks unto Almighty God, in whose name I called, and thou earnest. And now thou mayest depart in peace unto thine orders, and return unto me again at what time soever I shall call thee by thine oath, or by thy name, or by thine order, or by thine office which is granted thee from the Creator, and the power of God be with me and thee, and upon the whole issue of God. Amen. Form of pact with the spirit of Jupiter. From the complete book of magic science. The aforesaid bond of spirits, together with the seal and character of the planetary angel, must be written virgin parchment and laid before the spirit for signature when he appears. At that time the invocant must not lost confidence, but be patient, firm, bold, and persevering, and take care that he asks nor requires nothing of the spirit, but with a view to the glory of God and the well-being fellow creatures. Having obtained his desires of the spirit, the invocant may license him to depart. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost. Note: it would be advisable for the invocant to remain in the circle for a few minutes after reciting the license, and if the place of operation be in the open air, let him destroy all traces of the circle, etc., and return quietly to his home. But should the operation be performed in a retired part of a house, etc., the circle may remain, as it might serve in a like future operation, but the room or building must be locked up to avoid the intrusion of strangers. The agreement set forth above is purely ceremonial magic. In the case of black magic, it is the magician and not the demon who must sign the pact. When the black magician binds an elemental to his service, a battle of wits ensues, which the demon eventually wins. With his own blood, the magician signs the pact between himself and the demon, for in the arcanum of magic, it is declared that he controls the soul who controls the blood of another. As long as the magician does not fail, the elemental will fulfill to the letter his obligation under the pact, but the demon will try in every possible way to prevent the magician from carrying out his part of the contract. When the conjurer, ensconced within his circle, has evoked the spirit he desires to control and has made known his intention, the spirit will answer somewhat as follows: I cannot accede to your request nor fulfill it, unless after 50 years you give yourself to me, body and soul, to do with as I may please. If the magician refuses, other terms will be discussed. The spirit may say, I will remain in your service as long as on every Friday morning you will go forth upon the public street giving alms in the name of Lucifer. The first time you fail in this, you belong to me. If the magician still refuses, realizing that the demon will make it impossible for him to fulfill his contract, other terms will be discussed, until at last a pact is agreed upon. It may read as follows: I hereby promise the great spirit Lucifuge, prince of demons, that each year I will bring unto him a human soul to do with as it may please him, and in return Lucifuge promises to bestow upon me the treasures of the earth and fulfill my every desire for the length of my natural life. If I fail to bring him each year the offering specified above, then my own soul shall be forfeit to him. Signed, invocant signs pact with his own blood. The pentagram. In symbolism, an inverted figure always signifies a perverted power. The average person does not even suspect the occult properties of emblematic pentacles. On this subject, the great Paracelsus has written, No doubt many will scoff at the seals, their characters and their uses, which are described in these books, because it seems incredible to them that metals and characters which are dead should have any power and effect. Yet no one has ever proved that the metals and also the characters as we know them are dead, for the salts, sulfur, and quintessences of metals are the highest preservatives of human life and are far superior to all other simples. Translated from the original German. The black magician cannot use the symbols of white magic without bringing down upon himself the forces of white magic, which would be fatal to his schemes. He must therefore distort the hierograms so that they typify the occult fact that he himself is distorting the principles for which the symbols stand. Black magic is not a fundamental art. It is the misuse of an art. Therefore, it has no symbols of its own. It merely takes the emblematic figures of white magic, and by inverting and reversing them signifies that it is left-handed. A good instance of this practice is found in the pentagram, or five-pointed star, made of 5 connected lines. This figure is the time-honored symbol of the magical arts, and signifies the 5 properties of the great magical agent, the 5 senses of man, the 5 elements of nature, the 5 extremities of the human body. By means of the pentagram within his own soul, man not only may master and govern all creatures inferior to himself, but may demand consideration at the hands of those superior to himself. The pentagram. From Levi's Transcendental Magic. The pentagram is the figure of the microcosm, the magical formula of man. It is the one rising out of the 4, the human soul rising from the bondage of the animal nature. It is the true light, the star of the morning. It marks the location of 5 mysterious centers of force, the awakening of which is the supreme secret of white magic. The pentagram is used extensively in black magic, but when so used, its form always differs in one of 3 ways. The star may be broken at one point by not permitting the converging lines to touch. It may be inverted by having 1 point down and 2 up, or it may be distorted by having the points of varying lengths. When used in black magic, the pentagram is called the sign of the cloven hoof, or the footprint of the devil. The star with 2 points upward is also called the goat of Mendes, because the inverted star is the same shape as a goat's head. When the upright star turns and the upper point falls to the bottom, it signifies the fall of the morning star. The pentacles of the 7 planets and the seals and characters of the planetary angels. From a medieval book of spirits, unpublished. The 7 large circles are the planets, while the 2 small circles under each contain the seal and the character of the controlling intelligence of the planet. The elements and their inhabitants, for the most comprehensive and lucid exposition of occult pneumatology, the branch of philosophy dealing with spiritual substances, extant, mankind is indebted to Philippus Aureolus Paracelsus, Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, prince of alchemists and Hermetic philosophers and true possessor of the royal secret, the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. Paracelsus believed that each of the 4 primary elements known to the ancients, earth, fire, air, and water, consisted of a subtle, vaporous principle and a gross corporeal substance. Air is, therefore, twofold in nature: tangible atmosphere and an intangible volatile substratum, which may be termed spiritual air. Fire is visible and invisible, discernible and indiscernible, a spiritual, ethereal flame manifesting through a material, substantial flame. Carrying the analogy further, water consists of a dense fluid and a potential essence of a fluidic nature. Earth has likewise 2 essential parts, the lower being fixed, terreous, immobile, the higher, rarefied, mobile, and virtual. The general term elements has been applied to the lower or physical phases of these 4 primary principles, and the name elemental essences to their corresponding invisible spiritual constitutions. Minerals, plants, animals, and men live in a world composed of the gross side of these 4 elements, and from various combinations of them construct their living organisms. Henry Drummond, in Natural Law in the Spiritual World, describes this process as follows. If we analyze this material point at which all life starts, we shall find it to consist of a clear structureless, jelly-like substance resembling albumin or white of egg. It is made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Its name is protoplasm, and it is not only the structural unit with which all living bodies start in life, but with which they are subsequently built up. Protoplasm, says Huxley, simple or nucleated, is the formal basis of all life. It is the clay of the potter. The water element of the ancient philosophers has been metamorphosed into the hydrogen of modern science. The air has become oxygen, the fire, nitrogen, the earth, carbon. Just as visible nature is populated by an infinite number of living creatures, so, according to Paracelsus, the invisible, spiritual counterpart of visible nature, composed of the tenuous principles of the visible elements, is inhabited by a host of peculiar beings, to whom he has given the name elementals, and which have later been termed the nature spirits. Paracelsus divided these people of the elements into 4 distinct groups, which he called gnomes, undines, sylphs, and salamanders. He taught that they were really living entities, many resembling human beings in shape and inhabiting worlds of their own, unknown to man because his undeveloped senses were incapable of functioning beyond the limitations of the grosser elements. The civilizations of Greece, Rome, Egypt, China, and India believed implicitly in satyrs, sprites, and goblins. They peopled the sea with mermaids, the rivers and fountains with nymphs, the air with fairies, the fire with lares and penates, and the earth with fauns, dryads and hamadryads. These nature spirits were held in the highest esteem, and propitiatory offerings were made to them. Occasionally, as the result of atmospheric conditions or the peculiar sensitiveness of the devotee, they became visible. Many authors wrote concerning them in terms which signify that they had actually beheld these inhabitants of nature's finer realms. A number of authorities are of the opinion that many of the gods worshipped by the pagans were elementals, for some of these invisibles were believed to be of commanding stature and magnificent deportment. The Greeks gave the name Decimon to some of these elementals, especially those of the higher orders, and worshipped them. Probably the most famous of these demons is the mysterious spirit which instructed Socrates, and of whom that great philosopher spoke in the highest terms. Those who have devoted much study to the invisible constitution of man realize that it is quite probable the demon of Socrates and the angel of Jacob Boehme were in reality not elementals, but the overshadowing divine natures of these philosophers themselves. In his notes to Apuleius on Di, God of Socrates, Thomas Taylor says, "As the daemon of Socrates, therefore, was doubtless one of the highest order, as may be inferred from the intellectual superiority of Socrates to most other men, Apuleius is justified in calling this daemon a god. And that the daemon of Socrates indeed was divine is evident from the testimony of Socrates himself in the first Alcibiades. For in the course of that dialogue he clearly says, 'I have long been of the opinion that the god did not as yet direct me to hold any conversation with you.' And in the Apology he most unequivocally evinces that this daemon is allotted a divine transcendency, considered as ranking in the order of daemons. The idea once held that the invisible elements surrounding and interpenetrating the earth were peopled with living, intelligent beings may seem ridiculous to the prosaic mind of today. This doctrine, however, has found favor with some of the greatest intellects of the world. The sylphs of Phaetus Cardan, the philosopher of Milan, the salamander seen by Benvenuto Cellini, the Pan of St. Anthony, and Le Petit Homme Rouge, the little red man or gnome of Napoleon Bonaparte, have found their places in the pages of history. Literature has also perpetuated the concept of nature spirits, the mischievous Puck of Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, the elementals of Alexander Pope's Rosicrucian poem, the Rape of the Lock, the mysterious creatures of Lord Lytton's Zanoni, James Barrie's immortal Tinker Bell, and the famous bowlers that Rip Van Winkle encountered in the Catskill Mountains are well-known characters to students of literature. The folklore and mythology of all peoples abound in legends concerning these mysterious little figures, who haunt old castles, guard treasures in the depths of the earth, and build their homes under the spreading protection of toadstools. Fairies are the delight of childhood, and most children give them up with reluctance. Not so very long ago, the greatest minds of the world believed in the existence of fairies, and it is still an open question as to whether Plato, Socrates, and Iamblichus were wrong when they avowed their reality. Paracelsus, when describing the substances which constitute the bodies of the elementals, divided flesh into 2 kinds, the first being that which we have all inherited through Adam. This is the visible, corporeal flesh. The second was that flesh which had not descended from Adam, and being more attenuated, was not subject to the limitations of the former. The bodies of the elementals were composed of this transubstantial flesh. Paracelsus stated that there is as much difference between the bodies of men and the bodies of the nature spirits as there is between matter and spirit. Yet, he adds, the elementals are not spirits, because they have flesh, blood, and bones. They live and propagate offspring. They cat and talk, act and sleep, and consequently they cannot be properly called spirits. They are beings occupying a place between men and spirits, resembling men and spirits, resembling men and women in their organization and form, and resembling spirits in the rapidity of their locomotion. Philosophia Occulta, translated by Franz Hartmann. Later, the same author calls these creatures composita, inasmuch as the substance out of which they are composed seems to be a composite of spirit and matter. He uses color to explain the idea. Thus, the mixture of blue and red gives purple, a new color, resembling neither of the others yet composed of both. Such is the case with the nature spirits. They resemble neither spiritual creatures nor material beings, yet are composed of the substance which we may call spiritual matter, or ether. Paracelsus further adds that whereas man is composed of several natures, spirit, soul, mind, and body, combined in one unit, the elemental has but one principle, the ether out of which it is composed and in which it lives. The reader must remember that by ether is meant the spiritual essence of one of the four elements. There are as many ethers as there are elements, and as many distinct families of nature spirits as there are ethers. These families are completely isolated in their own ether and have no intercourse with the denizens of the other ethers. But, as man has within his own nature centers of consciousness sensitive to the impulses of all the four ethers, it is possible for any of the elemental kingdoms to communicate with him under proper conditions. The nature spirits cannot be destroyed by the grosser elements, such as material fire, earth, air, or water, for they function in a rate of vibration higher than that of earthy substances. Being composed of only one element or principle, the ether in which they function, they have no immortal spirit, and at death merely disintegrate back into the element from which they were originally individualized. No individual consciousness is preserved after death, for there is no superior vehicle present to contain it. Being made of but one substance, there is no friction between vehicles. Thus there is little wear or tear incurred by their bodily functions, and they therefore live to great age. Those composed of earth ether are the shortest lived, those composed of air ether the longest. The average length of life is between 300 and 1,000 years. Paracelsus maintained that they live in conditions similar to our earth environments and are somewhat subject to disease. These creatures are thought to be incapable of spiritual development, but most of them are of a high moral character. Concerning the elemental ethers in which the nature spirits exist, Paracelsus wrote, "They live in the four elements, the nymphs in the element of water, the sylphs in that of the air, the pygmies in the earth, and the salamanders in fire. They are also called undines, sylvestres, gnomi, volcani, and sei. Each species moves only in the element to which it belongs, and neither of them can go out of its appropriate element, which is to them as the air is to us, or the water to fishes, and none of them can live in the element belonging to another class. To each elemental being, the element in which it lives is transparent, invisible, and respirable, as the atmosphere is to ourselves." Philosophia Occulta, translated by Franz Hartmann. The reader should be careful not to confuse the nature spirits with the true life waves evolving through the invisible worlds. While the elementals are composed of only one etheric or atomic essence, the angels, archangels, and other superior, transcendental entities have composite organisms consisting of a spiritual nature and a chain of vehicles to express that nature, not unlike those of men, but not including the physical body with its attendant limitations. To the philosophy of nature spirits is generally attributed an Eastern origin, probably Brahmanic, and Paracelsus secured his knowledge of them from Oriental sages with whom he came in contact during his lifetime of philosophical wanderings. The Egyptians and Greeks gleaned their information from the same source. The four main divisions of nature spirits must now be considered separately, according to the teachings of Paracelsus and the Abbé de Villars, and such scanty writings of other authors as are available. The gnomes, the elementals who dwell in that attenuated body of the earth, which is called the terreous ether, are grouped together under the general heading of gnomes. The name is probably derived from the Greek genomus, meaning earth dweller. See New English Dictionary. Just as there are many types of human beings evolving through the objective physical elements of nature, so there are many types of gnomes evolving through the subjective ethereal body of nature. These earth spirits work in an element so close in vibratory rate to the material earth that they have immense power over its rocks and flora, and also over the mineral elements in the animal and human kingdoms. Some, like the pygmies, work with the stones, gems, and metals, and are supposed to be the guardians of hidden treasures. They live in caves, far down in what the Scandinavians called the land of the Nibelungen. In Wagner's wonderful opera cycle, The Ring of the Nibelungen, Alberich makes himself king of the pygmies and forces these little creatures to gather for him the treasures concealed beneath the surface of the earth. Besides the pygmies, there are other gnomes, who are called tree and forest sprites. To this group belong the sylvesters, satyrs, pans, dryads, hamadryads, daedalus, elves, brownies, and little old men of the woods. Paracelsus states that the gnomes build houses of substances resembling in their constituencies alabaster, marble, and cement, but the true nature of these materials is unknown, having no counterpart in physical nature. Some families of gnomes gather in communities, while others are indigenous to the substances with and in which they work. For example, the hamadryads live and die with the plants or trees of which they are a part. Every shrub and flower is said to have its own nature spirit, which often uses the physical body of the plant as its habitation. The ancient philosophers, recognizing the principle of intelligence manifesting itself in every department of nature alike, believed that the quality of natural selection exhibited by creatures not possessing organized mentalities expressed in reality the decisions of the nature spirits themselves. C. M. Gailey, in the Classic Myths, says, "It was a pleasing trait in the old paganism that it loved to trace in every operation of nature the agency of deity. The imagination of the Greeks peopled the regions of earth and sea with divinities, to whose agency it attributed the phenomena that our philosophy ascribes to the operation of natural law. Thus, in behalf of the plant it worked with, the elemental accepted and rejected food elements, deposited coloring matter therein, preserved and protected the seed, and performed many other beneficent offices. Each species was served by a different but appropriate type of nature spirit. Those working with poisonous shrubs, for example, were offensive in their appearance. It is said the nature spirits of poison hemlock resemble closely tiny human skeletons, thinly covered with a semi-transparent flesh. They live in and through the hemlock, and if it be cut down, remain with the broken shoots until both die. But while there is the slightest evidence of life in the shrub, it shows the presence of the elemental guardian. Great trees also have their nature spirits, but these are much larger than the elementals of smaller plants. The labors of the pygmies include the cutting of the crystals in the rocks and the development of veins of ore. When the gnomes are laboring with animals or human beings, their work is confined to the tissues corresponding with their own natures. Hence they work with the bones, which belong to the mineral kingdom, and the ancients believed the reconstruction of broken members to be impossible without the cooperation of the elementals. The gnomes are of various sizes, most of them much smaller than human beings, though some of them have the power of changing their stature at will. This is the result of the extreme mobility of the element in which they function. Concerning them, the Abbé de Villars wrote, "The earth is filled well nigh to its center with gnomes, people of slight stature, who are the guardians of treasures, minerals, and precious stones. They are ingenious, friends of man, and easy to govern." Not all authorities agree concerning the amiable disposition of the gnomes. Many state that they are of a tricky and malicious nature, difficult to manage, and treacherous. Writers agree, however, that when their confidence is won, they are faithful and true. The philosophers and initiates of the ancient world were instructed concerning these mysterious little people and were taught how to communicate with them and gain their cooperation in undertakings of importance. The Magi were always warned, however, never to betray the trust of the elementals, for if they did, the invisible creatures, working through the subjective nature of man, could cause them endless sorrow and probably ultimate destruction. So long as the mystic served others, the gnomes would serve him, but if he sought to use their aid selfishly to gain temporal power, they would turn upon him with unrelenting fury. The same was Hugh if he sought to deceive them. The earth spirits meet at certain times of the year in great conclaves, as Shakespeare suggests in his Midsummer Night's Dream, where the elementals all gather to rejoice in the beauty and harmony of nature and the prospects of an excellent harvest. The gnomes are ruled over by a king whom they greatly love and revere. His name is Gob, hence his subjects are often called goblins. Medieval mystics gave a comma of creation, one of the cardinal points, to each of the four kingdoms of nature spirits, and because of their earthy character, the gnomes were assigned to the north, the place recognized by the ancients as the source of darkness and death. One of the four main divisions of human disposition was also assigned to the gnomes, and because so many of them dwelt in the darkness of caves and the gloom of forests, their temperament was said to be melancholy, gloomy, and despondent. By this, it is not meant that they themselves are of such disposition, but rather that they have special control over elements of similar consistency. The gnomes marry and have families, and the female gnomes are called Nornid, es. Some wear clothing woven of the element in which they live. In other instances, their garments are part of themselves and grow with them, like the fur of animals. The gnomes are said to have insatiable appetites and to spend a great part of the rime eating, but they earn their food by diligent and conscientious labor. Most of them are of a miserly temperament, fond of storing things away in secret places. There is abundant evidence of the fact that small children often see the gnomes, inasmuch as their contact with the material side of nature is not yet complete and they still function more or less consciously in the invisible worlds. Conventional gnomes. From Gellerup's Den Eldre Eddas Gudsang. The type of gnome most frequently seen is the brownie, or elf, a mischievous and grotesque little creature from 12 to 18 inches high, usually dressed in green or russet brown. Most of them appear as very aged, often with long white beards, and their figures are inclined to rotundity. They can be seen scampering out of holes in the stumps of trees, and sometimes they vanish by actually dissolving into the tree itself. According to Paracelsus, man lives in the exterior elements and the elementals live in the interior elements. The latter have dwellings and clothing, manners and customs, languages and governments of their own, in the same sense as the bees have their queens and herds of animals their leaders. Philosophia Occulta, translated by Franz Hartmann. Paracelsus differs somewhat from the Greek mystics concerning the environmental limitations imposed on the nature spirits. The Swiss philosopher constitutes them of subtle, invisible ethers. According to this hypothesis, they would be visible only at certain times and only to those en rapport with their ethereal vibrations. The Greeks, on the other hand, apparently believed that many nature spirits had material constitutions capable of functioning in the physical world. Often the recollection of a dream is so vivid that, upon awakening, a person actually believes that he has passed through a physical experience. The difficulty of accurately judging as to the end of physical sight and the beginning of ethereal vision may account for these differences of opinion. Even this explanation, however, does not satisfactorily account for the satyr, which, according to St. Jerome, was captured alive during the reign of Constantine and exhibited to the people. It was of human form with the horns and feet of a goat. After its death, it was preserved in salt and taken to the emperor that he might testify to its reality. It is within the bounds of probability that this curiosity was what modern science knows as a monstrosity. The Undines. As the gnomes were limited in their function to the elements of the earth, so the Undines, a name given to the family of water elementals, function in the invisible, spiritual essence called humid or liquid ether. In its vibratory rate, this is close to the element water, and so the undines are able to control, to a great degree, the course and function of this fluid in nature. Beauty seems to be the keynote of the water spirits. Wherever we find them pictured in art or sculpture, they abound in symmetry and grace. Controlling the water element, which has always been a feminine symbol, it is natural that the water spirits should most often be symbolized as female. There are many groups of undines. Some inhabit waterfalls where they can be seen in the spray, others are indigenous to swiftly moving rivers. Some have their habitat in dripping, oozing fens or marshes, while other groups dwell in clear mountain lakes. According to the philosophers of antiquity, every fountain had its nymph, every ocean wave its oceanid. The water spirits were known under such names as Oreads, Nereids, Lemoniads, Naiads, water sprites, sea maids, mermaids, and Potomides. Often the water nymphs derived their names from the streams, lakes, or seas in which they dwelt. In describing them, the ancients agreed on certain salient features. In general, nearly all the undines closely resembled human beings in appearance and size, though the ones inhabiting small streams and fountains were of correspondingly lesser proportions. It was believed that these water spirits were occasionally capable of assuming the appearance of normal human beings and actually associating with men and women. There are many legends about these spirits and their adoption by the families of fishermen, but in nearly every case, the undines heard the call of the waters and returned to the realm of Neptune, the king of the sea. Practically nothing is known concerning the male undines. The water spirits did not establish homes in the same way that the gnomes did, but lived in coral caves under the ocean, or among the reeds growing on the banks of rivers or the shores of lakes. Among the Celts, there is a legend to the effect that Ireland was peopled, before the coming of its present inhabitants, by a strange race of semi-divine creatures. With the coming of the modem, Celts they retired into the marshes and fens, where they remain even to this day. Diminutive undines lived under lily pads and in little houses of moss sprayed by waterfalls. The undines worked with the vital essences and liquids in plants, animals, and human beings, and were present in everything containing water. When seen, the undines generally resembled the goddesses of Greek statuary. They rose from the water draped in mist and could not exist very long apart from it. A mermaid. From Lycosthenes Prodigiorum AC Ostentorum Chronicon. Probably the most famous of the undines were the mythological mermaids, with which early mariners peopled the seven seas. Belief in the existence of these creatures, the upper half of their bodies human in form and the lower half fish-like, may have been inspired by flocks of penguins seen at great distance, or possibly seals. In medieval descriptions of mermaids, it was also stated that their hair was green like seaweed, and that they wore wreaths twisted from the blossoms of subaqueous plants and sea anemones. There are many families of undines, each with its peculiar limitations. It is impossible to consider them here in detail. Their ruler, Nexa, they love and honor, and serve untiringly. Their temperament is said to be vital, and to them has been given as their throne the western comer of creation. They are rather emotional beings, friendly to human life and fond of serving mankind. They are sometimes pictured riding on dolphins or other great fish and seem to have a special love of flowers and plants, which they serve almost as devotedly and intelligently as the gnomes. Ancient poets have said that the songs of the undines were heard in the west wind and that their lives were consecrated to the beautifying of the material earth. The salamanders. The third group of elementals is the salamanders, or spirits of fire, who live in that attenuated spiritual ether which is the invisible fire element of nature. Without them, material fire cannot exist. A match cannot be struck, nor will flint and steel give off their spark without the assistance of a salamander, who immediately appears, so the medieval mystics believed, evoked by friction. Man is unable to communicate successfully with the salamanders, owing to the fiery element in which they dwell, for everything is resolved to ashes that comes into their presence. By specially prepared compounds of herbs and perfumes, the philosophers of the ancient world manufactured many kinds of incense. When incense was burned, the vapors which arose were especially suitable as a medium for the expression of these elementals, who, by borrowing the ethereal effluvium from the incense smoke, were able to make their presence felt. A salamander, according to Paracelsus. From Paracelsus' Auslegung von 30 magischen Figuren. The Egyptians, Chaldeans, and Persians often mistook the salamanders for gods because of their radiant splendor and great power. The Greeks, following the example of earlier nations, deified the fire spirits and in their honor kept incense and altar fire, burning perpetually. The salamanders are as varied in their grouping and arrangement as either the undines or the gnomes. There are many families of them, differing in appearance, size, and dignity. Sometimes the salamanders were visible as small balls of light. Paracelsus says, salamanders have been seen in the shapes of fiery balls or tongues of fire, running over the fields or peering in houses. Philosophia Occulta, translated by Franz Hartmann. Medieval investigators of the nature spirits were of the opinion that the most common form of salamander was lizard-like in shape, a foot or more in length, and visible as a glowing urodela, twisting and crawling in the midst of the fire. Another group was described as huge flaming giants in flowing robes, protected with sheets of fiery armor. Certain medieval authorities, among them the Abbé de Villars, held that Zarathustra, Zoroaster, was the son of Vesta, believed to have been the wife of Noah, and the great salamander Oromasis. Hence, from that time onward, undying fires have been maintained upon the Persian altars in honor of Zarathustra's flaming father. One most important subdivision of the salamanders was the Athnisi. These creatures appeared only as indistinct globes. They were supposed to float over water at night and occasionally to appear as forks of flame on the masts and rigging of ships, St. Elmo's fire. The salamanders were the strongest and most powerful of the elementals and had as their ruler a magnificent flaming spirit called Jinn, terrible and awe-inspiring in appearance. The salamanders were dangerous, and the sages were warned to keep away from them, as the benefits derived from studying them were often not commensurate with the price paid. As the ancients associated heat with the south, this corner of creation was assigned to the salamanders as their drone, and they exerted special influence over all beings of fiery or tempestuous temperament. In both animals and men, the salamanders work through the emotional nature by means of the body heat, the liver, and the bloodstream. Without their assistance, there would be no warmth. The sylphs. While the sages said that the fourth class of elementals, or sylphs, vid in the element of air, they meant by this not the natural atmosphere of the earth, but the invisible, intangible, spiritual medium, an ethereal substance similar in composition to our atmosphere, but far more subtle. In the last, Discourse of Socrates, as preserved by Plato in his Pseudo, the condemned philosopher says, "And upon the earth are animals and men, some in a middle region, others elementals, dwelling about the air, as we dwell about the sea, others in islands which the air flows round, near the continent. And in a word, the air is used by them as the water, and the sea are by us, and the ether is to them what the air is to us. Moreover, the temperament of their seasons is such that they have no disease." Paracelsus disputes this, and live much longer than we do, and have sight and bearing and smell, and all the other senses, in far greater perfection, in the same degree that air is purer than water, or the ether than air. Also they have temples and sacred places in which the gods really dwell, and they hear their voices and receive their answers, and are conscious of them and hold converse with them, and they see the sun, moon, and stars as they really are, and their other blessedness is of a piece with this. While the sylphs were believed to live among the clouds and in the surrounding air, their true home was upon the tops of mountains. A sylph, from sketch by Howard Wookey. The sylphs were changeable entities, passing to and fro with the rapidity of lightning. They work through the gases and ethers of the earth and are kindly disposed toward human beings. They are nearly always represented as winged, sometimes as tiny cherubs, and at other times as delicate fairies. In his editorial notes to the Occult Sciences of Salverte, Anthony Todd Thompson says, "The fays and fairies are evidently of Scandinavian origin, although the name of fairy is supposed to be derived from, or rather is a modification of the Persian peri, an imaginary benevolent being, whose province it was to guard men from the maledictions of evil spirits. But with more probability, it may be referred to the Gothic fagur, as the term elves is from alpha, the general appellation for the whole tribe. If this derivation of the name of fairy be admitted, we may date the commencement of the popular belief in British fairies to the period of the Danish conquest. They were supposed to be diminutive aerial beings, beautiful, lively, and beneficent in their intercourse with mortals, inhabiting a region called Fairyland, Alfheiner, commonly appearing on Earth at intervals when they left traces of their visits in beautiful green rings where the dewy sward had been trodden in their moonlight dances. To the sylphs, the ancients gave the labor of modeling the snowflakes and gathering clouds. This latter they accomplished with the cooperation of the undines who supplied the moisture. The winds were their particular vehicle, and the ancients referred to them as the spirits of the air. They are the highest of all the elementals, their native element being the highest in vibratory rate. They live hundreds of years, often attaining to 1,000 years and never seeming to grow old. The leader of the sylphs is called Peralda, who is said to dwell on the highest mountain of the earth. The female sylphs were called Sylpleids. It is believed that the sylphs, salamanders, and nymphs had much to do with the oracles of the ancients, that in fact they were the ones who spoke from the depths of the earth and from the air above. The sylphs sometimes assume human form, but apparently for only short periods of time. Their size varies, but in the majority of cases, they are no larger than human beings and often considerably smaller. It is said that the sylphs have accepted human beings into their communities and have permitted them to live there for a considerable period. In fact, Paracelsus wrote of such an incident, but of course it could not have occurred while the human stranger was in his physical body. By some, the Muses of the Greeks are believed to have been sylphs, for these spirits are said to gather around the mind of the dreamer, the poet, and the artist, and inspire him with their intimate knowledge of the beauties and workings of nature. To the sylphs were given the eastern comer of creation. Their temperament is mirthful, changeable, and eccentric. The peculiar qualities common to men of genius are supposedly the result of the cooperation of sylphs, whose aid also brings with it the sylphic inconsistency. The sylphs labor with the gases of the human body and indirectly with the nervous system, where their inconstancy is again apparent. They have no fixed domicile, but wander about from place to place, elemental nomads, invisible but ever-present powers in the intelligent activity of the universe. General observations. Certain of the ancients, differing with Paracelsus, shared the opinion that the elemental kingdoms were capable of waging war upon one another, and they recognized in the battlings of the elements disagreements among these kingdoms of nature spirits. When lightning struck a rock and splintered it, they believed that the salamanders were attacking the gnomes. As they could not attack one another on the plane of their own peculiar etheric essences, owing to the fact that there was no vibratory correspondence between the four ethers of which these kingdoms are composed, they had to attack through a common denominator, namely, the material substance of the physical universe over which they had a certain amount of power. Wars were also fought within the groups themselves. One army of gnomes would attack another army, and civil war would be rife among them. Philosophers of long ago solved the problems of nature's apparent inconsistencies by individualizing and personifying all its forces, crediting them with having temperaments not unlike the human, and then expecting them to exhibit typical human inconsistencies. The 4 fixed signs of the zodiac were assigned to the 4 kingdoms of elementals. The gnomes were said to be of the nature of Taurus, the undines of the nature of Scorpio, the salamanders exemplified the constitution of Leo, while the sylphs manipulated the emanations of Aquarius. The Christian Church gathered all the elemental entities together under the title of demon. This is a misnomer with far-reaching consequences, for to the average mind, the word demon means an evil thing, and the nature spirits are essentially no more malevolent than are the minerals, plants, and animals. Many of the early church fathers asserted that they had met and debated with the elementals. As already stated, the nature spirits are without hope of immortality, although some philosophers have maintained that in isolated cases, immortality was conferred upon them by adepts and initiates who understood certain subtle principles of the invisible world. As disintegration takes place in the physical world, so it takes place in the ethereal counterpart of physical substance. Under normal conditions at death, a nature spirit is merely resolved back into the transparent primary essence from which it was originally individualized. Whatever evolutionary growth is made is recorded solely in the consciousness of that primary essence or element, and not in the temporarily individualized entity of the elemental. Being without man's compound organism and lacking his spiritual and intellectual vehicles, the nature spirits are subhuman in their rational intelligence, but from their functions, limited to one element, has resulted a specialized type of intelligence far ahead of man in those lines of research peculiar to the element in which they exist. The terms incubus and succubus have been applied indiscriminately by the Church Fathers to elementals. The incubus and succubus, however, are evil and unnatural creations, whereas elementals is a collective term for all the inhabitants of the four elemental essences. According to Paracelsus, the incubus and succubus, which are male and female respectively, are parasitical creatures subsisting upon the evil thoughts and emotions of the astral body. These terms are also applied to the superphysical organisms of sorcerers and black magicians. While these larvae are in no sense imaginary beings, they are, nevertheless, the offspring of the imagination. By the ancient sages, they were recognized as the invisible cause of vice because they hover in the ethers surrounding the morally weak and continually incite them to excesses of a degrading nature. For this reason, they frequent the atmosphere of the dope den, the dive, and the brothel, where they attach themselves to those unfortunates who have given themselves up to iniquity. By permitting his senses to become deadened through indulgence in habit-forming drugs or alcoholic stimulants, the individual becomes temporarily en rapport with these denizens of the astral plane. The ories seen by the hashish or opium addict and the lurid monsters which torment the victim of delirium tremens are examples of submundane beings, visible only to those whose evil practices are the magnet for their attraction. Differing widely from the elementals and also the incubus and succubus is the vampire, which is defined by Paracelsus as the astral body of a person, either living or dead, usually the latter state. The vampire seeks to prolong existence upon the physical plane by robbing the living of their vital energies and misappropriating such energies to its own ends. In his De Elite Spirituale, Paracelsus writes thus of these malignant beings: "A healthy and pure person cannot become obsessed by them, because such larvae can only act upon men if the latter make room for them in their minds. A healthy mind is a castle that cannot be invaded without the will of its master, but if they are allowed to enter, they excite the passions of men and women, they create cravings in them, they produce bad thoughts which act injuriously upon the brain, they sharpen the animal intellect and suffocate the moral sense. Evil spirits obsess only those human beings in whom the animal nature is predominating. Minds that are illuminated by the spirit of truth cannot be possessed. Only those who are habitually guided by their own lower impulses may become subjected to their influences." See Paracelsus by Franz Hartmann. A strange concept, and one somewhat at variance with the conventional, is that evolved by the Count de Gabalis concerning the Immaculate Conception, namely that it represents the union of a human being with an elemental. Among the offspring of such unions he lists Hercules, Achilles, Aeneas, Theseus, Melchizedek, the divine Plato, Apollonius of Tyana, and Merlin the magician. Hermetic pharmacology, chemistry, and therapeutics. The art of healing was originally one of the secret sciences of the priestcraft, and the mystery of its source is obscured by the same veil which hides the genesis of religious belief. All higher forms of knowledge were originally in the possession of the sacerdotal castes. The temple was the cradle of civilization. The priests, exercising their divine prerogative, made the laws and enforced them, appointed the rulers and controlled them, ministered to the needs of the living, and guided the destinies of the dead. All branches of learning were monopolized by the priesthood, who admitted into their ranks only those intellectually and morally qualified to perpetuate their arcanum. The following quotation from Plato's Statesman is apropos of the subject. In Egypt, the The king himself is not allowed to reign unless he have priestly powers, and if he should be one of another class and have obtained the throne by violence, he must get enrolled in the priestcraft. Candidates aspiring to membership in the religious orders underwent severe tests to prove their worthiness. These ordeals were called initiations. Those who passed them successfully were welcomed as brothers by the priests and were instructed in the secret teachings. Among the ancients, philosophy, science, and religion were never considered as separate units. Each was regarded as an integral part of the whole. Philosophy was scientific and religious. Science was philosophic and religious. Religion was philosophic and scientific. Perfect wisdom was considered unattainable save as the result of harmonizing all three of these expressions of mental and moral activity. While modern physicians accredit Hippocrates with being the father of medicine, the ancient therapeutes ascribed to the immortal Hermes the distinction of being the founder of the art of healing. Clemens Alexandrinus, in describing the books purported to be from the stylus of Hermes, divided the sacred writings into 6 general classifications, one of which, the Pastophorus, was devoted to the science of medicine. The Smaragdine, or Emerald Tablet, found in the valley of Ebron and generally accredited to Hermes, is in reality a chemical formula of a high and secret order. Hippocrates, the famous Greek physician during the 5th century before Christ, dissociated the healing art from the other sciences of the temple and thereby established a precedent for separateness. One of the consequences is the present widespread crass scientific materialism. The ancients realized the interdependence of the sciences. The modems do not, and as a result, incomplete systems of learning are attempting to maintain isolated individualism. The obstacles which confront present-day scientific research are largely the result of prejudicial limitations imposed by those who are unwilling to accept that which transcends the concrete perceptions of the 5 primary human senses. The Paracelsian system of medical philosophy. During the Middle Ages, the long-ignored axioms and formulae of Hermetic wisdom were assembled once more and chronicled, and systematic attempts were made to test their accuracy. To Theophrastus of Hohenheim, who called himself Paracelsus, a name meaning greater than Celsus, the world is indebted for much of the knowledge it now possesses of the ancient systems of medicine. Paracelsus devoted his entire life to the study and exposition of Hermetic philosophy. Every notion and theory was grist to his mill, and while members of the medical fraternity belittle his memory now as they opposed his system then, the occult world knows that he will yet be recognized as the greatest physician of all times. While the heterodox and exotic temperament of Paracelsus has been held against him by his enemies, and his wanderlust has been called vagabondage, he was one of the few minds who intelligently sought to reconcile the art of healing with the philosophic and religious systems of paganism and Christianity. In defending his right to seek knowledge in all parts of the earth and among all classes of society, Paracelsus wrote, "Therefore I consider that it is for me a matter of praise, not of blame, that I have hitherto and worthily pursued my wanderings. For this will I bear witness respecting nature. He who will investigate her ways must travel her books with his feet. That which is written is investigated through its letters, but nature from land to land, as often a land, so often a leaf. Thus is the codex of nature, thus must its leaves be turned." Paracelsus by John Maxon Stillman. Paracelsus was a great observationalist, and those who knew him best have called him the second Hermes and the Trismegistus of Switzerland. He traveled Europe from end to end and may have penetrated eastern lands while running down superstitions and ferreting out supposedly lost doctrines. From the gypsies, he learned much concerning the uses of simples, and apparently from the Arabians concerning the making of talismans and the influences of the heavenly bodies. Paracelsus felt that the healing of the sick was of far greater importance than the maintaining of an orthodox medical standing. So he sacrificed what might otherwise have been a dignified medical career, and at the cost of lifelong persecution, bitterly attacked the therapeutic systems of his day. Uppermost in his mind was the hypothesis that everything in the universe is good for something, which accounts for his cutting fungus from tombstones and collecting dew on glass plates at midnight. He was a true explorer of nature's arcanum. Many authorities have held the opinion that he was the discoverer of mesmerism, and that Mesmer evolved the art as the result of studying the writings of this great Swiss physician. The utter contempt which Paracelsus felt for the narrow systems of medicine in vogue during his lifetime, and his conviction of their inadequacy, are best expressed in his own quaint way. But the number of diseases that originate from some unknown causes is far greater than those that come from mechanical causes, and for such diseases our physicians know no cure, because not knowing such causes they cannot remove them. All they can prudently do is to observe the patient and make their guesses about his condition, and the patient may rest satisfied if the medicines administered to him do no serious harm and do not prevent his recovery. The best of our popular physicians are the ones that do least harm. But unfortunately, some poison their patients with mercury, others purge them or bleed them to death. There are some who have learned so much that their learning has driven out all their common sense, and there are others who care a great deal more for their own profit than for the health of their patients. A disease does not change its state to accommodate itself to the knowledge of the physician, but the physician should understand the causes of the disease. A physician should be a servant of nature and not her enemy. He should be able to guide and direct her in her struggle for life, and not throw, by his unreasonable interference, fresh obstacles in the way of recovery. From the Paragranum, translated by Franz Hartmann. The belief that nearly all diseases have their origin in the invisible nature of man, the astrum, is a fundamental precept of Hermetic medicine, for while Hermetists in no way disregarded the physical body, they believed that man's material constitution was an emanation from, or an objectification of, his invisible spiritual principles. A brief, but it is believed fairly comprehensive, resume of the Hermetic principles of Paracelsus follows. There is one vital substance in nature upon which all things subsist. It is called arcseus, or vital life force, and is synonymous with the astral light or spiritual air of the ancients. In regard to this substance, Eliphas Levi has written, "Light, that creative agent, the vibrations of which are the movement and life of all things. Light latent in the universal ether, radiating about absorbing centers, which, being saturated thereby, project movement and life in their turn, so forming creative currents. Light astralized in the stars, animalized in animals, humanized in human beings. Light, which vegetates all plants, glistens in metals, produces all forms of nature, and equilibrates all by the laws of universal sympathy. This is the light which exhibits the phenomena of magnetism, divined by Paracelsus, which tinctures the blood, being released from the air as it is inhaled and discharged by the hermetic bellows of the lungs." The history of magic. This vital energy has its origin in the spiritual body of the earth. Every created thing has two bodies, one visible and substantial, the other invisible and transcendent. The latter consists of an ethereal counterpart of the physical form. It constitutes the vehicle of arcseus and may be called a vital body. This etheric shadow sheath is not dissipated by death, but remains until the physical form is entirely disintegrated. These etheric doubles, seen around graveyards, have given rise to a belief in ghosts. Being much finer in its substances than the earthly body, the etheric double is far more susceptible to impulses and inharmonies. It is derangements of this astral light body that cause much disease. Paracelsus taught that a person with a morbid mental attitude could poison his own etheric nature, and this infection, diverting the natural flow of vital life force, would later appear as a physical ailment. All plants and minerals have an invisible nature composed of this arcseus, but each manifests it in a different way. Concerning the astral light bodies of flowers, James Gaffarel, in 1650, wrote the following: "I answer that though they be chopped in pieces, brayed in a mortar, and even burnt to ashes, yet do they nevertheless retain, by a certain secret and wonderful power of nature, both in the juice and in the ashes, the self-same form and figure that they had before, and though it be not there visible, yet it not may by art be drawn forth, and made visible to the eye by an artist." This perhaps will seem a ridiculous story to those who read only the titles of books, but those that please may see this truth confirmed if they but have recourse to the works of M. Duchesne, S. de la Violette, one of the best chimists that our age hath produced, who affirms that himself saw an excellent Polish physician of Cracovia, who kept in glasses the ashes of almost all the herbs that are known, so that when any one, out of curiosity, had a desire to see any of them, as for example a rose, in one of his glasses, he took that where the ashes of a rose were preserved, and holding it over a lighted candle, so soon as it ever began to feel the heat, you should presently see the ashes begin to move, which afterwards rising up and dispersing themselves about the glass, you should immediately observe a kind of little dark cloud, which dividing itself into many parts, it came at length to represent a rose, but so fair, so fresh, and so perfect a one, that you would have thought it to have been as substantial and as odoriferous a rose as grows on the rose tree. Unheard of curiosities concerning talismanical sculpture of the Persians. Paracelsus, recognizing derangements of the etheric double as the most important cause of disease, sought to reharmonize its substances by bringing into contact with it other bodies whose vital energy could supply elements needed or were strong enough to overcome the diseased conditions existing in the aura of the sufferer. Its invisible cause having been thus removed, the ailment speedily vanished. The vehicle for the arcseus, or vital life force, Paracelsus called the mumia. A good example of a physical mumia is vaccine, which is the vehicle of a semi-astral virus. Anything which serves as a medium for the transmission of the arduous, whether it be organic or inorganic, truly physical or partly spiritualized, was termed a mumia. The most universal form of the mumia was ether, which modern science has accepted as a hypothetical substance serving as a medium between the realm of vital energy and that of organic and inorganic substance. The control of universal energy is virtually impossible, save through one of its vehicles, the mumia. A good example of this is food. Man does not secure nourishment from dead animal or plant organisms, but when he incorporates their structures into his own body, he first gains control over the mumia, or etheric double, of the animal or plant. Having obtained this control, the human organism then diverts the flow of the arduous to its own uses. Paracelsus says, "That which constitutes life is contained in the mumia, and by imparting the mumia, we impart life." This is the secret of the remedial properties of talismans and amulets, for the mumia of the substances of which they are composed serves as a channel to connect the person wearing them with certain manifestations of the universal vital life force. According to Paracelsus, in the same way that plants purify the atmosphere by accepting into their constitutions the carbon dioxide exhaled by animals and humans, so may plants and animals accept disease elements transferred to them by human beings. These lower forms of life, having organisms and needs different from man, are often able to assimilate these substances without ill effect. At other times, the plant or animal dies, sacrificed in order that the more intelligent and consequently more useful creature may survive. Paracelsus discovered that in either case the patient was gradually relieved of his malady, when the lower life had either completely assimilated the foreign mumia from the patient or had itself died and disintegrated as the result of its inability to do so. Complete recovery resulted. Many years of investigation were necessary to determine which herb or animal most readily accepted the mumia of each of various diseases. Paracelsus discovered that in many cases, plants revealed by their shape the particular organs of the human body which they served most effectively. The medical system of Paracelsus was based on the theory that by removing the diseased etheric mumia from the organism of the patient and causing it to be accepted into the nature of some distant and disinterested thing of comparatively little value, it was possible to divert from the patient the flow of the arcsis, which had been continually revitalizing and nourishing the malady. Its vehicle of expression being transplanted, the arcsis necessarily accompanied its mumia, and the patient recovered. The Hermetic theory concerning the causations of disease. According to the Hermetic philosophers, there were 7 primary causes of disease. The first was evil spirits. These were regarded as creatures born of degenerate actions, subsisting on the vital energies of those to whom they attached themselves. The second cause was a derangement of the spiritual nature and the material nature. These two, failing to coordinate, produced mental and physical subnormality. The third was an unhealthy or abnormal mental attitude, melancholia, morbid emotions, excessive feeling, such as passions, lusts, greeds, and hates, affected the mumia, from which they reacted into the physical body, where they resulted in ulcers, tumors, cancers, fevers, and tuberculosis. The ancients viewed the disease germ as a unit of mumia, which had been impregnated with the emanations from evil influences which it had contacted. In other words, germs were minute creatures born out of man's evil thoughts and actions. The fourth cause of disease was what the Orientals called karma, that is, the law of compensation, which demanded that the individual pay in full for the indiscretions and delinquencies of the past. A physician had to be very careful how he interfered with the workings of this law, lest he thwart the plan of eternal justice. The fifth cause was the motion and aspects of the heavenly bodies. The stars did not compel the sickness, but rather impelled it. The Hermetists taught that a strong and wise man ruled his stars, but that a negative, weak person was ruled by them. These 5 causes of disease are all superphysical in nature. They must be estimated by inductive and deductive reasoning and a careful consideration of the life and temperament of the patient. The 6th cause of disease was a misuse of faculty, organ, or function, such as overstraining a member or overtaxing the nerves. The 7th cause was the presence in the system of foreign substances, impurities, or obstructions. Under this heading must be considered diet, air, sunlight, and the presence of foreign bodies. This list does not include accidental injuries. Such do not belong under the heading of disease. Frequently, they are methods by which the law of karma expresses itself. Johannes Baptiste von Helmont. From von Helmont's Ausgang der Artsen Kunst. At the beginning of the 17th century, von Helmont, the Belgian alchemist, to whom, incidentally, the world is indebted for the common term gas, as distinguished from other kinds of air, while experimenting with the root of A, touched it to the tip of his tongue without swallowing any of the substance. He himself describes the result in the following manner. Immediately my head seemed tied tightly with a string, and soon after there happened to me a singular circumstance such as I had never before experienced. I observed with astonishment that I no longer felt and thought with the head, but with the region of the stomach, as if consciousness had now taken up its seat in the stomach. Terrified by this unusual phenomenon, I asked myself and inquired into myself carefully, but I only became the more convinced that my power of perception became greater and more comprehensive. This intellectual clearness was associated with great pleasure. I did not sleep, nor did I dream. I was perfectly sober, and my health was perfect. I had occasionally had ecstasies, but these had nothing in common with this condition of the stomach, in which it thought and felt and almost excluded all cooperation of the head. In the meantime, my friends were troubled with the fear that I might go mad. But my faith to God and my submission to His will soon dissipated this fear. This state continued for 2 hours, after which one had same dizziness. I afterwards frequently tasted of the A, but I never again could reproduce these sensations. Van Helmont, Demon's Idea. Reprinted by R. Davidson in The Mistletoe and Its Philosophy. Von Helmont is only one of many who have accidentally hit upon the secrets of the early priestcrafts, but none in this age give evidence of an adequate comprehension of the ancient Hermetic secrets. From the description von Helmont gives, it is probable that the herb mentioned by him paralyzed temporarily the cerebrospinal nervous system, the result being that the consciousness was forced to function through the sympathetic nervous system and its brain, the solar plexus. According to the Hermetists, disease could be prevented or successfully combated in 7 ways. First, by spells and invocations, in which the physician ordered the evil spirit causing the disease to depart from the patient. This procedure was probably based on the biblical account of the man possessed of devils whom Jesus healed by commanding the devils to leave the man and enter into a herd of swine. Sometimes the evil spirits entered a patient at the bidding of someone desiring to injure him. In these cases, the physician commanded the spirits to return to the one who sent them. It is recorded that in some instances, the evil spirits departed through the mouth in the form of clouds of smoke, sometimes from the nostrils as flames. It is even averred that the spirits might depart in the form of birds and insects. The second method of healing was by vibration. The inharmonies of the bodies were neutralized by chanting spells and intoning the sacred names, or by playing upon musical instruments and singing. Sometimes articles of various colors were exposed to the sight of the sick, for the ancients recognized, at least in part, the principle of color therapeutics, now in the process of rediscovery. The third method was with the aid of talismans, charms, and amulets. The ancients believed that the planets controlled the functions of the human body, and that by making charms out of different metals, they could combat the malignant influences of the various stars. Thus, a person who is anemic lacks iron. Iron was believed to be under the control of Mars. Therefore, in order to bring the influence of Mars to the sufferer, around his neck was hung a talisman made of iron, and bearing upon it certain secret instructions reputed to have the power of invoking the spirit of Mars. If there was too much iron in the system, the patient was subjected to the influence of a talisman composed of the metal corresponding to some planet having an antipathy to Mars. This influence would then offset the Mars energy and thus aid in restoring normality. The fourth method was by the aid of herbs and simples. While they used metal talismans, the majority of the ancient physicians did not approve of mineral medicine in any form for internal use. Herbs were their favorite remedies. Like the metals, each herb was assigned to one of the planets. Having diagnosed by the stars the sickness and its cause, the doctors then administered the herbal antidote. The fifth method of healing disease was by prayer. All ancient peoples believed in the compassionate intercession of the deity for the alleviation of human suffering. Paracelsus said that faith would cure all disease. Few persons, however, possess a sufficient degree of faith. The sixth method, which was prevention rather than cure, was regulation of the diet and daily habits of life. The individual, by avoiding the things which caused illness, remained well. The ancients believed that health was the normal state of man. Disease was the result of man's disregard of the dictates of nature. The seventh method was practical medicine, consisting chiefly of bleeding, purging, and similar lines of treatment. These procedures, while useful in moderation, were dangerous in excess. Many a useful citizen has died 25 or 50 years before his time as the result of drastic purging or of having all the blood drained out of his body. Paracelsus used all 7 methods of treatment, and even his worst enemies admitted that he accomplished results almost miraculous in character. Near his old estate in Hohenheim, the dew falls very heavily at certain seasons of the year, and Paracelsus discovered that by gathering the dew under certain configurations of the planets, he obtained a water possessing marvelous medicinal virtue, for it had absorbed the properties of the heavenly bodies. Hermetic herbalism and pharmacology. The herbs of the fields were sacred to the early pagans, who believed that the gods had made plants for the cure of human ills. When properly prepared and applied, each root and shrub could be used for the alleviation of suffering, or for the development of spiritual, mental, moral, or physical powers. In The Mistletoe and Its Philosophy, R. Davidson pays the following beautiful tribute to the plants. Books have been written on the language of flowers and herbs. The poet from the earliest ages has held the sweetest and most loving converse with them. Kings are even glad to obtain their essences at second hand to perfume themselves. But to the true physician, nature's high priest, they speak in a far higher and more exalted strain. There is not a plant or mineral which has disclosed the last of its properties to the scientists. How can they feel confident that for every one of the discovered properties there may not be many powers concealed in the inner nature of the plant? Well, have flowers been called the stars of earth? And why should they not be beautiful? Have they not from the time of their birth smiled in the splendor of the sun by day and slumbered under the brightness of the stars by night? Have they not come from another and more spiritual world to our earth? Seeing that God made every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew. Many primitive peoples used herbal remedies, with many remarkable cures. The Chinese, Egyptians, and American Indians cured with herbs diseases for which modern science knows no remedy. Dr. Nicholas Culpeper, whose useful life ended in 1654, was probably the most famous of herbalists. Finding that the medical systems of his day were unsatisfactory in the extreme, Culpeper turned his attention to the plants of the fields and discovered a medium of healing which gained for him national renown. In Dr. Culpeper's correlation of astrology and herbalism, each plant was under the jurisdiction of one of the planets or luminaries. He believed that disease was also controlled by celestial configurations. He summed up his system of treatment as follows. You may oppose diseases by herbs of the planet opposite to the planet that causes them, as diseases of Jupiter by herbs of Mercury, and the contrary, diseases of the luminaries by the herbs of Saturn, and the contrary, diseases of Mars by herbs of Venus, and the contrary. There is a way to cure diseases, sometimes by sympathy, and so every planet cures his own disease, as the sun and moon by their herbs cure the eyes, Saturn the spleen, Jupiter the liver, Mars the gall and diseases of choler, and Venus diseases in the instruments of generation. The complete herbal. Medieval European herbalists rediscovered only in part the ancient Hermetic secrets of Egypt and Greece. These earlier nations evolved the fundamentals of nearly all modern arts and sciences. At that time, the methods used in healing were among the secrets imparted to initiates of the mysteries. Unctions, collyria, philters, and potions were concocted to the accompaniment of strange rites. The effectiveness of these medicines is a matter of historical record. Incenses and perfumes were also much used. Nicholas Culpeper. From Culpeper's Semiotica Uranica, this famous physician, herbalist, and astrologer spent the greater part of his useful life ranging the hills and forests of England and cataloging literally hundreds of medicinal herbs. Condemning the unnatural methods of contemporaneous medicos, Culpeper wrote, "This not being pleasing and less profitable tome, I consulted with my two brothers, Dr. Reason and Dr. Experience, and took a voyage to visit my mother Nature, by whose advice, together with the help of Dr. Diligence, I at last obtained my desire. And, being warned by Murter Honesty, a stranger in our days, to publish it to the world, I have done it." From the introduction to the 1835 edition of the Complete Herbal. Dr. Johnson said of Culpeper that he merited the gratitude of posterity. Barrett in his Magus describes the theory on which they worked as follows. 4. Because our spirit is the pure, subtle, lucid, airy, and unctuous vapor of the blood, nothing, therefore, is better adapted for collyriums than the like vapors which are more suitable to our spirit in substance, for then, by reason of their likeness, they do more stir up, attract, and transform the spirit. Poisons were thoroughly studied, and in some communities, extracts of deadly herbs were administered to persons sentenced to death, as in the case of Socrates. The infamous Borgias of Italy developed the art of poisoning to its highest degree. Unnumbered brilliant men and women were quietly and efficiently disposed of by the almost superhuman knowledge of chemistry which for many centuries was preserved in the Borgia family. Egyptian priests discovered herb extracts by means of which temporary clairvoyance could be induced, and they made use of these during the initiatory rituals of their mysteries. The drugs were sometimes mixed with the food given to candidates, and at other times were presented in the form of sacred potions, the nature of which was explained. Shortly after the drugs were administered to him, the neophyte was attacked by a spell of dizziness. He found himself floating through space, and while his physical body was absolutely insensible, being guarded by priests that no ill should befall it, the candidate passed through a number of weird experiences, which he was able to relate after regaining consciousness. In the light of present-day knowledge, it is difficult to appreciate an art so highly developed that by means of draughts, perfumes, and incenses, any mental attitude desired could be induced almost instantaneously, yet such an art actually existed among the priestcraft of the early pagan world. Concerning this subject, H.R. Blavatsky, the foremost occultist of the 19th century, has written, "Plants also have like mystical properties in a most wonderful degree, and the secrets of the herbs of dreams and enchantments are only lost to European science, and useless to say, too, are unknown to it, except in a few marked instances, such as opium and hashish. Yet, the psychical effects of even these few upon the human system are regarded as evidences of a temporary mental disorder." The women of Thessaly and Epirus, the female hierophants of the rites of Sabazius, did not carry their secrets away with the downfall of their sanctuaries. They are still preserved, and those who are aware of the nature of soma know the properties of other plants as well. Isis unveiled. Herbal compounds were used to cause temporary clairvoyance in connection with the oracles, especially the one at Delphi. Words spoken while in these imposed trances were regarded as prophetic. Modem mediums, while under control as the result of partly self-imposed catalepsy, give messages somewhat similar to those of the ancient prophets, but in the majority of cases, their results are far less accurate, for the soothsayers of today lack the knowledge of nature's hidden forces. The mysteries taught that during the higher degrees of initiation, the gods themselves took part in the instruction of candidates, or at least were present, which was in itself a benediction. As the deities dwelt in the invisible worlds and came only in their spiritual bodies, it was impossible for the neophyte to cognize them without the assistance of drugs which stimulated the clairvoyant center of his consciousness, probably the pineal gland. Many initiates in the ancient mysteries stated emphatically that they had conversed with the immortals and had beheld the gods. When the standards of the pagans became corrupted, a division took place in the mysteries. The band of truly enlightened ones separated themselves from the rest and, preserving the most important of their secrets, vanished without leaving a trace. The rest slowly drifted, like rudderless ships, on the rocks of degeneracy and disintegration. Some of the less important of the secret formulae fell into the hands of the profane, who perverted them, as in the case of the Bacchanalia, during which drugs were mixed with wine and became the real cause of the orgies. In certain parts of the earth, it was maintained that there were natural wells, springs, or fountains, in which the water, because of the minerals through which it coursed, was tinctured with sacred properties. Temples were often built near these spots, and in some cases natural caves which chanced to be in the vicinity were sanctified to some deity. The aspirants to initiation, and those who came to request prophetic dreams of the gods, were prepared by a fast, more or less prolonged, after which they partook of meals expressly prepared, and also of mysterious drinks, such as the water of Lethe, and the water of Mnemosyne in the grotto of Trophonius, or of the Sicyon in the mysteries of the Eleusinian. Different drugs were easily mixed up with the meats or introduced into the drinks, according to the state of mind or body into which it was necessary to throw the recipient, and the nature of the visions he was desirous of procuring. Salvertes, the Occult Sciences. The same author states that certain sects of early Christianity were accused of using drugs for the same general purposes as the pagans. The sect of the Assassins, or the Yezidees as they are more generally known, demonstrated a rather interesting aspect of the drug problem. In the 11th century, this order, by capturing the fortress of Mount Alamont, established itself at Iraq. Hassan Sabah, the founder of the order, known as the Old Man of the Mountain, is suspected of having controlled his followers by the use of narcotics. Hassan made his followers believe that they were in paradise, where they would be forever if they implicitly obeyed him while they were alive. De Quincey, in his Confessions of an Opium Eater, describes the peculiar psychological effects produced by this product of the poppy, and the use of a similar drug may have given rise to the idea of paradise, which filled the minds of the Yezidees. The philosophers of all ages have taught that the visible universe was but a fractional part of the whole, and that by analogy the physical body of man is in reality the least important part of his composite constitution. Most of the medical systems of today almost entirely ignore the superphysical man. They pay but scant attention to causes and concentrate their efforts on ameliorating effects. Paracelsus, noting the same proclivity on the part of physicians during his day, aptly remarked, "There is a great difference between the power that removes the invisible causes of disease and which is magic, and that which causes merely external effects to disappear, and which is physic, sorcery, and quackery." Translated by Franz Hartmann. Disease is unnatural and is evidence that there is a maladjustment within or between organs or tissues. Permanent health cannot be regained until harmony is restored. The outstanding virtue of Hermetic medicine was its recognition of spiritual and psychophysical derangements as being largely responsible for the condition which is called physical disease. Suggestive therapy was used with marked success by the priest-physicians of the ancient world. Among the American Indians, the shamans, or medicine men, dispelled sickness with the aid of mysterious dances, invocations, and charms. The fact that in spite of their ignorance of modern methods of medical treatment, these sorcerers effected innumerable cures is well worthy of consideration. The magic rituals used by the Egyptian priests for the curing of disease were based upon a highly developed comprehension of the complex workings of the human mind and its reactions upon the physical constitution. The Egyptian and Brahmin worlds undoubtedly understood the fundamental principle of vibrotherapeutics. By means of chants and mantras, which emphasized certain vowel and consonant sounds, they set up vibratory reactions which dispelled congestions and assisted nature in reconstructing broken members and depleted organisms. They also applied their knowledge of the laws governing vibration to the spiritual constitution of man. By their intonings, they stimulated latent centers of consciousness and thereby vastly increased the sensitiveness of the subjective nature. In the Book of Coming Forth by Day, many of the Egyptian secrets have been preserved to this generation. While this ancient scroll has been well translated, only a few understand the significance of its magical passages. Oriental races have a keen realization of the dynamics of sound. They know that every spoken word has tremendous power, and that by certain arrangements of words, they can create vortices of force in the invisible universe about them, and thereby profoundly influence physical substance. The sacred word by which the world was established, the lost word which Masonry is still seeking, and the threefold divine name symbolized by Aum, the creative tone of the Hindus, all are indicative of the veneration accorded the principle of sound. The so-called new discoveries of modern science are often only rediscoveries of secrets well known to the priests and philosophers of ancient pagandom. Man's inhumanity to man has resulted in the loss of records and formula, which, had they been preserved, would have solved many of the greatest problems of this civilization. With sword and firebrand, races obliterate the records of their predecessors, and then inevitably meet with an untimely fate for need of the very wisdom they have destroyed. Chemical syllables. From De Monte Snyder's Metamorphosis Planetarum. De Monte Snyder's declares that each of the above characters forms one syllables of a word having 7 syllables, the word itself representing the materia prima, or first substance of the universe. As all substance is composed of 7 powers combined according to certain cosmic laws, a great mystery is concealed within the 7-fold constitution of man and the universe. Of the above 7 characters, De Monte Snyder writes, "Whoever wants to know the true name and character of the materia prima shall know that out of the combination of the above figures syllables are produced, and out of these the verbum significativum."